As one of the 480 million people who are hyperfixated with the Pokemon franchise, it probably comes as no surprise to learn that I tend to replay these games a lot. When I was a little man, I played Pokemon Heart Gold Soul Silver 24/7 on my DSi XL, and now that I'm a big man, I do the same thing. I probably have about 30,000 hours in this game from the past 5 years alone. I don't know why, but I've always been a fan of replaying the Pokemon games, since in my mind, it always feels like a brand new adventure that I'm embarking on. Whether it's because I choose a new starter, I decide to switch up the team I'm using, or because I add some new challenge that makes the playthrough more interesting. Replaying Pokemon games has always been a major part of my life for as long as I can remember, which makes this video even more interesting because out of all the mainline Pokemon generations, there is only one that I have never replayed. Generation 7. Yup, you're hearing that correctly. The guy who talks about the 3DS 24/7 hasn't even replayed 2 out of the 4 mainline 3DS Pokemon games. I've replayed Sword and Shield, I've started a second playthrough of Scarlet and Violet, and I've even committed one of the worst sins in human history, which is replaying Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. But for some reason, I have not touched Pokemon Sun and Moon or Ultra Sun and Moon since their release dates. This honestly came as a huge surprise to me when I first realized this a couple months ago, since I don't necessarily dislike the 7th generation. As a matter of fact, I have some pretty fond memories of this era in Pokemon history, from the hype cycle leading up to the game's release, to the TCG that I was spending way too much money on. I was having a fantastic time as a Pokemon fan in 2016, and then of course we can't forget about the anime, which people tend to not like that much, but in my opinion, I thought it was a pretty nice change of pace from the normal anime style we were so used to up until that point. Now, I do have to preface that this generation was released when I was 13 years old, so I still had that unbreakable optimism, happiness, and joy when it pertained to this franchise, so that probably plays a role in why I view this generation so fondly. But even with all of the nice things that I can say about this era in Pokemon history, it doesn't get rid of the fact that I have not touched these games in years. My first time playing Pokemon Sun and Moon came on its release day in November of 2016, and all I can remember from that time is how excited I was about the Alola region. Before the release, I spent months yapping to my friends about how cool these games looked and how they were in Hawaii, and there was this wrestling tiger that was kind of weird but also kind of cool at the same time, and then I would spend hours on the computers at my local library simply watching all the different announcement trailers for this game. And then once it finally released, I spent that entire weekend grinding through the main story, and when it came to my first impressions, I thought the game was, it was okay. It definitely was not my favorite by a long shot, but it was still pretty good, I guess, since it was a Pokemon game and I was blinded by my love for this franchise. Yeah, in all honesty, I did not like Pokemon Sun and Moon as much as I thought I would when I first played it, and that was a major bummer since I loved everything else that had to do with this generation. Due to the fact that I was not a huge fan of these games, they would go on to rot on my shelf for years after I beat them. However, today that changes since I decided to revisit Pokemon Sun and Moon in 2025. Some of you may remember this, but I actually started this new playthrough of Pokemon Sun and Moon on my flight to Japan a couple of weeks ago, which was perfect by the way, since I was able to sink a ton of hours into this game, all in one sitting, and that is something I normally cannot do because I have quote-unquote responsibilities now. And also my attention span's kinda cooked. That flight was a total of 14 hours, and of those 14 hours, I would say about 8 of them consisted of me playing through the beginning parts of this game, and honestly, I had a decent time. for the first 30 minutes. Yeah, it was all sunshine and rainbows for me during those first 30 minutes. I was having fun, enjoying the game. I chose Rowlet as my starter and named him Goop because that name really suited him in my opinion. But then everything started to go downhill. Okay, I am being slightly over dramatic since the first 8 or so hours of my playthrough were not that bad, but also I was able to quickly pinpoint a couple of the reasons why I was not a big fan of this game as a kid. However, before I start complaining about the things I didn't like, because you did not click on this video for me to be a negative and annoying person for 30 plus minutes, I want to highlight some of the things that impressed me during the first couple of hours while playing this game. The first of which was the design and overall aesthetic of the Alola region. I've talked about this plenty of times before, but I love the concept of the Alola region and think a tropical Pokemon destination in general is a genius idea for the games, especially as someone who loves the original Adventures on the Orange Island arc in the Pokemon anime. The Alola region has always been something that tickled my little itty bitty Pokemon fan toes. I don't know why I said that. In my eyes, the first couple of areas in this game, such as Iki Town, Route 1, the Trainer School, and Howley City, all drive home those tropical themes of the Alola region perfectly. And like most Pokemon games, the music was a mwah, chef's kiss. Also, Game Freak did a great job, which is surprising to say, at making you feel like you were on an island, but at the same time, giving you a variety of unique areas to explore other than just the beach. For example, at the beginning of my playthrough, I spent a ton of time exploring every little corner of Melee Island, from the cities to the caves. I was immersed in this environment. And also, I was catching a ton of Pokemon. For example, I caught a Pikipek and I named it Bird, and then I got this young goose that I named Blump. However, out of all the areas that I explored during the beginning of the game, I especially liked Verdant Cavern, since the atmosphere was amazing, and once again, the music was chef's kiss. I also caught some more cool Pokemon in Verdant Cavern, such as my Alolan Diglett, which I named Glorp, and then my Alolan Rattata that I named Rat. Overall, the first couple hours of playing this game really helped jog my memory of how beautifully designed the Alola region was, so thumbs up to Game Freak for that. But don't worry, that thumbs up won't last for long. Aside from the game design, another area that left me pleasantly surprised during the first couple hours of my playthrough were the graphics. I did not realize that this game was gonna look pretty decent, and I especially could not stop myself from comparing it to Pokemon X and Y. For some context, I replayed Pokemon X and Y last year, and during that playthrough, I completely forgot how poorly it had aged from a graphics standpoint. So while going into this Sun and Moon playthrough, I was kind of expecting to be underwhelmed once again. But that was not the case at all. Instead, this game was pretty impressive. I would like to say that the word impressive should be taken with a grain of salt, since I am comparing this game to X and Y, which is not exactly known to be the pinnacle of Pokemon graphics. But regardless, Sun and Moon's graphics were way better than what I was expecting. Now, even though the graphics were nice from a surface level perspective, it does not mean that they were perfect in the slightest, since the battle animations were still pretty boring, like most Pokemon games nowadays, and some of the NPCs in this game felt completely lifeless when you would see them walking around the island. But hey, I'm gonna give this game a slight benefit of the doubt in comparison to the other Pokemon games with poor graphics, because it was on the 3DS, and I have no shame. So, I've sucked up to the graphics and aesthetic, now it's time for me to talk about what absolutely grinded my gears during the first 5 minutes of this game. And that's how annoyingly slow the cutscenes are. Not only were the cutscenes shoved in your face right at the beginning of this game, but they never stopped. Ever. Genuinely, they just kept going on and on and on. Don't get me wrong, I love a cutscene here and there, since they're a great way of telling a story and helping a player feel more immersed in the plot. But it has to be done in moderation. For example, when I initially booted up the game, I was pretty hyped when I saw the first cutscene with Lily. But I didn't realize that this cutscene was gonna be the first of 1,000. I started to feel so bored after the first 3 hours of this game, since every couple of steps I would take would trigger a new cutscene that I had to sit through, or a lengthy bit of dialogue that would drag on for minutes. This was also a major complaint that I and many others had in 2016 when we first played the game, but I did not remember how bad it was. Now, I should also take the time to emphasize that this is a very opinion-based take, since some people enjoy long bits of dialogue, but I am not one of those people. Instead, I like to call myself a Pokemon traditionalist. Personally, I enjoy the classic vanilla formula that the Pokemon games followed from the Game Boy all the way to the DS, where the plot was sprinkled in between your main adventure. So being bombarded by so much new content in this game did not sit well with me when I was a little baby LaiyenZ, and honestly, I'm still not the biggest fan. With that being said, this game threw another major curveball at my basic vanilla Pokemon fan brain with the Island Challenge. After surviving the hours of dialogue at the start of this game, I finally made it to the first Island Challenge in Verdant Cavern. And as you all know, the Island Challenges are this game's alternative to gyms. I remember when I was younger, I completely hated the idea of the Island Challenge, since, like I said, I'm a simple-brained Pokemon fan who loves doing all the traditional things that Pokemon games had to offer, such as gyms. So there being no gyms in this game was a big no-no for me. However, I did try my best to keep a more open-minded perspective this time around, and honestly, I kind of realized that there aren't many differences between the Island Challenges and regular gyms. I'm pretty sure Baby LaiyenZ was just being an annoying, close-minded brat, since the core concepts of a gym battle align pretty well with what the Island Challenge has to offer. You have to solve a puzzle or do a task while fighting different Pokemon along the way, then you fight a slightly stronger Pokemon, and in the end, you earn a reward. Of course, there are some differences. For example, you aren't fighting a gym leader, and instead are battling against trial captains and island kahunas, and then the final Pokemon you fight on each island is called a totem Pokemon, which is basically just a bigger, stronger version of a regular Pokemon that's protecting a totem that's holding your reward. Also, a cool little fun fact is these totem Pokemon and other wild Pokemon have the ability to call for help using the SOS mechanic, where wild Pokemon will show up and double team you. However, other than these minor changes, the Island Challenge does not stray too far away from regular gym battles, but I must say that I still prefer the normal gym format because I'm a brainwashed Pokemon fan. If things are different, then I get scared and I get a little nervous. As for the first Island Challenge in the game, it is Alima's Trial, and my goal was to find 2 Pokemon that were hiding in the cavern. In my case, it was an Alolan Rattata and Alolan Raticate, since I was playing on my copy of Pokemon Moon. This trial was super easy, since I had severely overleveled my goop, so the Rattatas and Raticates stood no chance against me, and in the end, after completing the trial, Alima gave me my reward, which was a Normalium Z Crystal. Z Crystals are the big gimmick in this game, similar to how Mega Evolutions were a key part in Generation 6, but Z moves don't even come close to the masterpiece that are Mega Evolutions. If you haven't played Pokemon Sun and Moon, you've probably still seen Z moves in some capacity, since they are kind of a meme. For example, there's the classic gif of Xerneas doing Twinkle Tackle. Now, don't worry, Z moves aren't completely devoid of detail in life, since before your Pokemon does the actual move, your character does this quirky little dance, which I love, since it's better than them just pressing the Z power ring and doing nothing else. As a standalone gimmick, Z moves are not that bad, but it's always gonna be overshadowed by Mega Evolutions in my eyes, and also in the eyes of basically every Pokemon fan ever. So, after finishing Alima's Trial and earning my first Z Crystal, I began to progress further through this game by exploring what was left on Melee Island. I should also make it known that I caught a ton of new Pokemon after completing completing the first trial, but most importantly, I caught my favorite Pokemon ever in my beloved goat, Slowpoke. I went all the way back to Route 1 just to hunt for this thing, since I love Slowpoke so much. It is my favorite Pokemon ever for some reason, and every time I do a new playthrough of a Pokemon game, I make sure to check if a Slowpoke is in it so I can catch one and make it my friend. This time around, I decided to give my Slowpoke a name that was fitting of its stature and beauty and elegance and aura, so I decided to name it LeBron. With LeBron now protecting me from the dangers of the Alola region, I continued with the story by visiting Melee Meadows, where I would find two key characters, Lily and How. Now may be a good time to talk about these characters and all the other characters that I've been interacting with during the story of this game, since there are definitely some quirky individuals. First, there's Lily, who is Professor Kukui's assistant, and she's also the girl we saw running in that secret base area and carrying Cosmog during one of the million cutscenes at the beginning of the game. Lily is by far one of the most important characters in Pokemon Sun and Moon, and we learn way more about her and her background as the game progresses, but towards the beginning, she is still kind of this mysterious individual who works for Kukui and is really awkward and nonchalant. The next character we see in Melee Meadows is How, and he is the classic best friend slash rival that you battle throughout the game. Some people tend to hate on How, but I don't have that strong of an opinion about him. He's not on my list of favorite rivals, but he isn't a character that I completely despise either, although I do think he gets pretty annoying at times. As I already mentioned, the professor of the Alola region is Professor Kukui, and he is, without a doubt, a top-tier goated professor. In my opinion, he is easily one of the best professors in all of the Pokemon games, and I've felt this way for years now, since when I first played this game back in 2016, I still thought this guy was super cool. Honestly, the characters in this game are one of the few things that I remember loving from my first playthrough as Baby LaiyenZ, and it's an area of this game that I've enjoyed a ton this time around, since there are so many different personalities and goofy individuals that you interact with. For example, the big bad team in this game, called Team Skull, is led by this guy. Just look at him. He's amazing. In addition to characters like Professor Kukui and Hala, Guzma is up there as one of my favorites in this game, and his dialogue is gold. It's some of the only dialogue in this game that I don't get deathly bored of reading. To be honest, Team Skull in general was a major bright spot for me during this playthrough, which is kind of ironic since they are meant to be the quote-unquote bad guys, but every time I found myself talking to a Team Skull grunt, I would either die laughing or feel incredibly bad. Also, Team Skull is very different in comparison to the evil teams we saw in Generations 1 through 6, since they aren't really trying to take over the entire world or cause some kind of natural disaster that would flood everything. Instead, the team is just a bunch of rejects that are going against the system in place on the island, such as the Island Challenge, and if we're being real here, I am also against the Island Challenge. So does that mean I'm a member of Team Skull? In reality, I barely view Team Skull as a super bad evil team. Obviously, they do partake in some shenanigans that I don't condone, but they aren't the individuals who are truly causing the problems in the Alola region. Instead, it's just a group of people who failed the Island Challenge and want to prove themselves. As for who the true evil team is in Pokemon Sun and Moon that are causing all the problems in the Alola region, that would be the Aether Foundation, but I'll talk more about them later. After doing basically everything that Melee Island had to offer, there was still one thing that I had to complete before I could make my way to the other islands in the game, and that was to complete the Grand Trial. Now you may be thinking, LaiyenZ, didn't you already do the Island Challenge? Yes, but that was just step one of me proving myself, since on each of the 4 islands in the game, you also have to partake in a Grand Trial, where where you battle against the Island Kahuna. To simplify things, this battle basically acts as a confirmation that you completed all the tasks on the island, and it also is a passage for you to travel to the rest of the region. The first grand trial in this game on Melee Island is against the absolute legend Hala. He uses fighting type Pokemon during this battle, and for some reason, I kind of struggled during it. It took me about 2 tries to beat Hala, which is too many, but hey, it's okay, it's alright, it's fine. I never claimed to be a Pokemon master, okay? After finally beating Hala, he gave me the Phytinium Z Crystal, and I was finally on my way to visit the next island in the game. Oh, and by the way, Goop evolved into a Dartrix, so that's cool. Before we move on to the next island, I'd like to quickly talk about a couple of other things that really stood out to me during the beginning and most of the duration of my playthrough. First of all, I love the designs of the Pokemon in the Alola region. There are so many different Pokemon that stood out to me from a visual standpoint, and I didn't realize how many of them I actually liked. For whatever reason, growing up, I was not too fond of the Pokemon in this region, and for the longest time, I always looked at them as somewhat mediocre, but having this new experience with the game has really enlightened me. Obviously, there are still some designs that I'm not a fan of, but that's to be expected in all Pokemon games, and for the most part, this region has a very solid group of designs. I am also a huge fan of the variant Pokemon concept that this game introduced, and it's something that I am so happy Game Freak has continued to do in newer generations, since it showcases how Pokemon don't always look the same around the world, and instead evolve based on their environments. Also, because of this concept, we were blessed with Alolan Persian, which is definitely one of the Pokemon of all time. It's beautiful. Look at him. Look at his face. Look at his face. Look at his head. One final little detail in this game that I grew to love during the beginning and through the progression of my playthrough was the Poke Ride feature. As you can probably tell by the name, this feature gives you the ability to ride Pokemon. Pause. There's a total of 9 different Pokemon that you can ride during the course of this game, and each one has its own unique use case. For example, the first Poke Ride that you gain access to is Tauros after you defeat Hala in the Grand Trial. Although Tauros is the first Poke Ride you get in this game, and also it's kind of the simplest, it was by far my most used ride Pokemon. As for what Tauros actually did, it basically goes fast. And that's about it. Or well, actually it breaks boulders also. I know it's simple, but after unlocking Tauros, I found myself using it whenever I could, since it made navigating each island so much faster. And you might be thinking, LaiyenZ, isn't that basically what bikes were used for in the other Pokemon games? Yeah, but riding a Tauros is cooler, okay? Also, the ride Pokemon helps save you from using an HM on one of the members of your team, so overall, the Poke Ride feature is an A+ in the Book of LaiyenZ. Alright, so after beating Hala and completing my duties on Melee Island, I finally got the chance to broaden my horizons by making my way to Akala Island. Also, I do realize that I spent a couple minutes complaining about the cutscenes and dialogue in this game, but for some reason, I really enjoyed the cutscene from Melee to Akala Island, and I can't really go into full detail why I liked it so much, but part of me thinks it's because it kind of felt like a scene from the anime. Once on Akala Island, we docked at Hiya City, and immediately, I was met by the love of my life and the person that inspires me to keep pushing along through the endless suffering and turmoil of my existence, the Island Kahuna, Olivia. Oh, and also the child Captain Mallow was there, but who cares, because Olivia. After being welcomed by Olivia and Mallow, I was kind of on my own again and had to chip away at the basic tasks on this island, but while doing this, I encountered another major key character in this game, Gladion. Gladion is another very important character in this game that I'll get into more later, but for now, I just had to battle against him. When it comes to the island challenges on Akala Island, there are actually 3 challenges that you have to do before the grand trial, one in Brooklet Hill, another in Wele Volcano Park, and finally in the Lush Jungle. These 3 trials were all significantly more difficult for me in comparison to the very first trial in this game, especially that damn totem Laurantis. I don't know why or how, but this Laurantis kicked my butt over and over and over again. I could not get past this Laurantis for the life of me. Yeah, it took way too many tries for me to beat this Laurantis, but after a while, I was able to overcome this devil. I will say that although I found the trials to be oddly difficult for me, that is more of a personal problem and less of a complaint about the game itself, because I suck at video games. I don't know if you guys have been able to catch on to this over the years, but like, I'm just not good at them. In general, I really liked Akala Island, and it's honestly my favorite island in the game. I love how diverse the locations were, especially the trial locations, because you got the chance to explore a volcano, a lake, and a jungle all in one place. Also, I can't forget to mention this, but I did a ton of new Pokemon catching while on Akala Island, since there were plenty of new Alolan Pokemon that I was encountering, and I made it a goal of mine during this playthrough to only catch Pokemon that were new to this generation. Well, other than LeBron the Slowpoke. Of course, I caught myself a Fomantis while in the Lush Jungle, so I could have my own little grass devil. And you might be saying, LaiyenZ, don't you already have Goop and he's a grass type? Yeah. Who cares about proper team building? I just want a team that looks cool. Sticking to the theme of having cool looking Pokemon, I also caught a Salandit while at Wele Volcano Park, so I could evolve it into a Salazzle. Funny enough, I really wanted a Salazzle during my first playthrough of this game as a kid, so I caught a Salandit, and I remember getting it to level 40 or something and wondering why it never evolved, but turns out only the female Salandits evolve, so I kinda got screwed over. However, this time around, I made sure to specifically catch a female Salandit so that I could finally have that Salazzle I wanted so badly. It only took 9 years. So after catching all the Pokemon that caught my eye on this island, it was then time for me to take on my beloved in the grand trial. I made my way to the Ruins of Life located in the Akala outskirts and took on Olivia in my second grand trial of the game. Surprisingly, unlike the other battles that I participated in up until this point, I was able to beat Olivia somewhat easily. Now, that's probably because I had multiple grass and water type Pokemon, and her specialty is rock, but also I am a bit of a Pokemon master. Once I defeated Olivia, she gave me the Rockium Z Crystal, and with that, my job was finished on Akala Island, meaning I could make my way to the next island in the game, Ula Ula Island. Ula Ula Island is actually the biggest island in the game, and it's also the island where things started to heat up a ton. Every twist and turn I took would lead to an encounter with Team Skull, and then the 3 island challenges that were here, once again, were very hard for me. Even though this island was like my personal hell, it still was able to bless me with the opportunity to find and catch a Mimikyu, so all my complaints get thrown out the window thanks to that. It did take quite a while, but I was able to find my very own Mimikyu in the thrifty Mega Mart, and I named it Ween after the holiday Halloween, because I have this limited edition Nintendo Store exclusive Halloween Mimikyu from 2017 that I cherish, and yeah, that's the backstory. As for the grand trial on Ula Ula Island, the kahuna is named Nanu, and he has so much aura. He is very Opium and Osama-sun core. I don't know if that makes any sense to 99% of the people watching this video, but if you get it, then it would make sense. That doesn't really help, does it? Nanu's cool, okay? That's all you need to know. Nanu looks cool. Thumbs up for Nanu. After finishing up on Ula Ula Island, I departed so I can go to the next and final island that I would be visiting during my Pokemon Sun and Moon playthrough, that being Pony Island. And I bet you can't guess what Pokemon the Island Kahuna here uses. A pony? One observation that I had about Pony Island was it gave me heavy Pokemon Coliseum vibes, mainly because it was super rocky and sandy and beige. Also, Seafolk Village literally looks like something pulled straight from the Coliseum games, outside of all the water, of course. Similar to Melee Melee Island, there is only one island trial and totem Pokemon that you have to battle on Pony Island, and that is Kommo-o. I always pronounce this name wrong. I don't know why. However, before I battled the Totem Kommo, I took on Hapu and her pony in the Grand Trial for this island. This was an interesting twist on things, since the Grand Trial came before the Totem Pokemon, and also I didn't have much issues with Hapu since she specialized in Ground-type Pokemon, and my team was kinda goated against Ground-type. I was able to quickly defeat Hapu, and then I scurried to the end of the Pony Canyon where I would encounter the Totem Pokemon. This battle was somewhat difficult. Now, I was able to beat it in one try, but it came down to the wire, and once I finally defeated the Kommo, I received the Dragonium Z Crystal, and also with that, I had finished all 7 island trials in this game. Now that all the island trials were behind me, I feel like I can confidently say that I am still not a huge fan of the concept. I think it was creative and fits very well with the theme of Pokemon Sun and Moon, but when comparing it to the other Pokemon games, I don't think there is ever a situation where I would choose this over the classic gyms concept. However, I can say that I did enjoy the island trials way more than I did as baby lions, so there is definitely some improvement there. After defeating the Kommo, I did not immediately leave Pony Canyon, since I did spend some time hunting for a Jangmo-o, which, oh my god, why the hell did it take so damn long to catch this Pokemon? I know it's technically this region's pseudo-legendary, but I spent a couple of hours looking for this thing, and I was close to giving up, because I don't even have an emotional attachment to Jangmo-o. I just wanted one because I like having pseudo-legendaries in each game, but this thing decided to make my life a living hell. This also happens to me in basically every Pokemon game I ever play, and I don't know why. Mundane, simple tasks just become so unnecessarily difficult. For example, I tried catching Dialga in Pokemon Brilliant Diamond, and it took me like 7 hours and 50 Pokeballs. After a while, I was able to catch a Jangmo-o after so many hours, and with that, I was able to continue on with the story of this game. Now, you may be wondering, LaiyenZ, have you been enjoying this game so far? Because you've yapped a ton about your experience and the different opinions you have, but you haven't said if the game is better than you remembered or if it's worse than you remembered. Well, inquisitive LaiyenZ viewers, to answer that question, I don't really know what to say. Once I reached the 75% point of my playthrough, I started to have mixed opinions on the experience I was having, since I won't lie, I was having a pretty good time. I was enjoying exploring the region, and I loved finding new Pokemon, but then at the same time, I found myself getting very bored every other second. It was one of the weirdest dilemmas I have ever found myself in with a video game, because I would have the urge to play more, but when I did play more, I would immediately get bored because of a cutscene that would drag on for too long. This cycle of wanting to play the game and then getting bored would continue throughout the entirety of my playthrough, all the way until I beat the game. So yeah, to answer the question of have I been enjoying my playthrough of Pokemon Sun and Moon, the best response I can give is, I will say that I have been able to appreciate more things in this game in comparison to the time Baby LaiyenZ played it almost 9 years ago, but there are still some areas that I greatly dislike. For example, I'm not trying to continuously beat a dead horse here by saying this so many times, but the amount of dialogue and cutscenes in this game really killed the vibe for me. I felt like I was being dragged along everywhere I went because of these cutscenes, and it was almost like I didn't have the free will to explore on my own. Instead, I just had a giant checklist that I had to tick things off of. Now, this is an issue in most Pokemon games nowadays, so it's not like this is an outlier situation, but for some reason, the hand-holding felt especially prominent in Sun and Moon because I felt like I was being interrupted so often and getting told what to do. However, I will look past how slow and hand-holdy this game is, since the story really helped boost my impression of this game this time around. How do I say this? As a kid, I was not the brightest light bulb in the box, okay? Or maybe I was not the sharpest tool in the tool shed. I was kind of stupid, alright? The story never really resonated with me as a kid, since half the time I was confused on what was going on, but now with a slightly larger brain, I have really come to enjoy the story that this game is telling. Now, I do think the story would have been 10 times better if it was portrayed in a manner that was not insanely slow and boring, but from simply a storytelling perspective, this game was really good. To summarize the plot of this game without spoiling too much and yapping for another 30 minutes, these people are bad. Basically, the Aether Foundation was created to shelter Pokemon from threats and act as an organization that treated Pokemon for their injuries or sicknesses, but that's what they want you to think. In reality, the Aether Foundation's goal is to summon the Ultra Beasts. The Ultra Beasts are these legendary Pokemon from other dimensions, and the Aether Foundation wants to create wormholes so that they can summon these Ultra Beasts and use their power. Specifically, the Aether Foundation president Lusamine has a bit of a fetish for these things and really wants to summon them. Now that I think about it, fetish is probably not the right word here in this scenario. In order to create the wormholes that summon the Ultra Beasts, Lusamine and the Aether Foundation need Nebby, which is that Cosmog that Lily's been protecting. We also learn during the course of this story that Lily and Gladion are actually siblings, and on top of that, they are the children of Lusamine, which is honestly not that big of a plot twist if you think about it, because, well, look at them. They all look exactly like one another. So in the end, we learned that Team Skull is not actually the big bad group of this region, and instead were manipulated by the true antagonists of this game, who are Lusamine and the Aether Foundation. I have to say that although I played this game before, I was still shocked by the plot twists and storylines that were developing over the course of my playthrough, and to see the way Lusamine began to lose her mind during the end of this game was insane. All of the different storylines that developed during the course of this game would lead to what I believe was the craziest part of this story, when we would visit Ultra Space and Lusamine would merge with her Ultra Beast to become a giant jellyfish. I verbally started screaming and yelling at my 3DS when I saw Lusamine do all this, because what the hell is going on? She is freaking me out. I know I've consistently stated that I struggled with battles in this game and each battle felt harder than the last, but I was not prepared for this Ultra Space Lusamine battle at all, because she whooped me. And I kinda liked it. I restarted this battle a solid 38 times, and in the end, I was able to come out victorious, but I also think I have PTSD now. Once Lusamine was defeated, she still tried to attack me in her jellyfish Ultra Beast form, but luckily Nebby was there to save the day and make sure I didn't die. Overall, the main plotline of this game was great. I think the characters and the story all tied into one another perfectly, and I love the way that they were able to hide who the real evil team was until the end of the game. even if it was kind of obvious who the evil team was. So, with the Aether Foundation and Team Skull now defeated, I caught myself a Lunala at the Altar of the Moon, and the main story of this game came to an end. But the game itself was not over yet. Remember at the very beginning of this video how I said I'm a Pokemon traditionalist and that this game goes against my traditionalist ways? Well, I was somewhat lying, since the final part of this game is to take on the newly created Pokemon League. I love that they still incorporated a Pokemon League and champion in this game, since it is such a classic concept in all forms of Pokemon media, so to have a game without it would have felt like a travesty, since whenever I personally finish a Pokemon game, I always look forward to doing that Champion Hall of Fame photo at the end. Also, the Pokemon League in this game is really well done. The design of the area is beautiful, and the choice of Elite Four members was an A+, since it included my goat Hala and my love Olivia. After defeating all of the Elite Four members, I was met with the surprise that the island champion of the Alola region is actually Professor Kukui. Who would have guessed this? Okay, I actually was not that surprised since I remembered this fact from my first playthrough, but still, Kukui as the champion is a wonderful final touch to this game, and after beating the champion and having the Hall of Fame montage play, we cut to the next day. With the evil team now defeated and having become the new champion of the Alola region, it seemed like my time with this game was finally over. But no, there was still one final thing that I had to do, and that was to catch Tapu Koko, the guardian Pokemon that saved me at the very beginning of this game. So I went to where we first met, had an intense battle, and ended up catching the Tapu Koko without having to reset the game a million times, which is very uncharacteristic for me. And with that, the game came to an end. So, almost 9 years after my first playthrough of this game, I finally revisited Pokemon Sun and Moon, and I have to say, this game is not that terrible. There are some areas that I didn't like as a kid, and I still do not like as an adult, but all things considered, I really enjoyed my time in the Alola region, and being able to relive the story, rediscover the Alolan Pokemon, and explore the different parts of all the islands really made me feel like baby Lions from 2016 who was so hyped to play this game. However, I have to say that my time with Generation 7 is not completely over yet, because there is still one challenge that I need to take on. But that's for a later time. Okay, thank you all so much for making it to this point of the video. I know it was a giant yap fest, but that's kind of how all my content is at this point. I just like to speak off the dome and talk about whatever I'm feeling. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to drop a like and subscribe so that number can become very big and I can become very happy and an amazing person, since as we all know, the bigger the number, the better the person. Comment down below your opinions on the 7th generation of Pokemon, from the games, to the show, to even the TCG. I would love to hear how this generation impacted you. Also, make sure to check out some of my past videos. I think you'll really enjoy them. And finally, once again, make sure to subscribe. Alright, thank you all so much for watching again, and I'll see you all eventually. Not you